Hey, everybody, welcome to Sex is Medicine, your number one resource for holistic sex education. I am Miss Devi Ward Erickson, absolutely delighted to be here with you once again for another juicy and enriching episode of Sex is Medicine. My guest this evening is the lovely Kelley Mountain of goddessmodern.com. And Kelley is here to talk with us today about men and intimacy and men bringing more of their fullness to the women in their lives through service, through love, through contribution, why that doesn't happen, and how that is an actual inherent desire of most men. And I just want to preface this by saying that when we talk about men in the show, we are talking about cisgender heterosexual men. We do understand that there are a large variety of men that have many different orientations to sexuality and all different sorts of things. So in this particular episode, we are shining a spotlight specifically on cisgender heterosexual men. So a little bit about Kelley. Kelley is an intimacy, wellness, creativity, and event producer. And these have been your main outlets of service to the world and personal passions growing since 1999. Wow. Kelley uses these mediums to create beauty and inspiration in the world, from the individual to the masses. Wellness consultations, body work and healing sessions, empowerment work, creativity, dance performance and workshops, spiritual circles, women's circles, men's work, dance events, all these incredible things. And of course, sensuality, sexuality, and intimacy coaching, retreats, and wellness retreats are some of her specialities. So thank you so much for joining us today, Kelley.
Hi, thank you.
Anything else I left out that you want to add?
I think that kind of touches on all the little parts.
Yeah, you're like a Renaissance woman.
Yeah, it's been just quite a journey over the years. You know how it is. It's like over time, just one thread weaves in and another thread, and before you know it, you're just working with this whole network of offerings. And yeah.
How did you get started in this work of being a guide and a coach and a facilitator?
Oh gosh, well, it really started when I met this woman that I ended up apprenticing with in Chinese herbal medicine. And that really opened the door for me with education and training in holistic health and well-being. Mm-hmm. And I've been working in that path for about 20 years, mostly with women in the realms of holistic health and movement and creativity and sensuality. And that path actually is what brought me to this path of working with men in the last 5 years. I've been working primarily with men in the last 5 years in the realms of intimacy and sensuality. And it's just been so beautiful to bring all that healing energy and experience that I gained along the path of holistic wellness into these experiences with men in the context of intimacy and sensuality. And it's just really been such a beautiful journey of like what we're talking about today, focusing on revealing the beauty and the purity in the hearts of men to be of service to the women in their world, whether that woman is their lover or their mother or their sister, or their neighbor, whoever. If a man knows that he has contributed to a woman's happiness, it just lights him up from the inside out. And so that's one of many, many pieces that I feel really excited to bring into the world, especially to share with women, because I feel like as women, you know, we're all on this collective journey together of healing and empowerment and coming to greater understanding of what it means to be a woman and what it means to be a man and how they relate to each other. You know, it's like we've been in this mass confusion for like thousands of years, for all of recorded history. And we're at this point where we're realizing, okay, there's a different way, there's a different natural order. And so I just feel passionate about helping to bring this kind of information to women, to help equip women with more insight as we are in our process of our own evolution and how to step into our roles in ways that actually help to create effective, warm, inviting, supportive space for the men to join us in the journey.
Beautiful. Yeah, there's so much wounding in the society between cisgender men and cisgender women. And, you know, the book Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus, and it like lays it out that we're like inherently at odds, and we truly aren't. We're actually like inherently very congruent, very similar. I mean, we all start from the same cells and the way they split off. I mean, I think anatomically, I think up until 12 weeks or something, or what is the gestation period where the genitals actually start to form as either female or male, but in the beginning, it's just a bunch of erectile tissue and nerve endings, right? So our similarities, I think, are more inherent than our differences, and yet the way we're socialized is very divisive. And so I too found in my work, after specializing in working with women for many, many years, when I integrated that aspect of working with men, one of the things that stood out to me the most was exactly the topic of our conversation today, which is that desire in so many of these men to support the women that they loved. And also this agony and the tragedy of not understanding how to do so effectively, not having the tools and not having the education. Right. So it's a very pertinent and necessary conversation we're having to help heal those wounds and help repair that divide.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our culture, you know, there's all types of education available, yet the education that we really need as a culture to evolve is education on what it is to be a human. How does this work? How does this function? First of all, this body, you know, and then how I relate to myself, and then how I relate to another person, you know, whether it's same, like another woman or another man or everything across the board. It's like, how does that work? How does it function? And yes, there are inherent core similarities. And then there's these beautiful contradictory opposites, these polar opposites, not contradictory, complementary opposites that have a value and they have a part. And it's like, we need some more education and understanding how those complementary opposites actually do work as a collaborative creative force, right? And it's like, together, when we have more understanding around this, I think it will play itself out in the world and how we choose to create this world, because we're in such a, especially at this time, we're in such a massive point of like rewriting the story, you know, on so many levels. And so it's really going to be important that we understand these deeper layers of like, what does this mean to be a human, and how does this work? And yeah, so I feel like there's really a need for greater education and understanding. And I think it really needs to come from the home, I think, you know, of families, coming from within families. So like really helping to educate mothers and fathers around all of this for themselves, and how to be helpful guides and mentors for the little humans that they're producing.
Yeah. So what are some of those complementary but different things that you see between men and women?
Well, first of all, it's kind of typical but the communication style, not only communication style, but there's ways, I think, that as women we are very, and I'm just going to speak very general in this whole topic, right? Of course, there's always nuances, but women are typically very sensitive, specifically energetically. Like, we are picking up so much from our environment that's energetic to inform us about our experience. And that's, in a sense, that's kind of how we communicate too. We not only use our words, but we're using like all kinds of nonverbal communication to express ourselves. And men typically are, it's not that they're not sensitive in these ways, they definitely are. At the same time, they really, whereas like there's a communications that almost like I get this visual with the women. It's almost like our communication style is almost like we cast a big net out there, and a man's communication style is just like he's got an arrow. You know, he just shoots an arrow, and it's very clear and simplified and to the point, and that's what really works for them. So when those two things collide, and you've got a man who really functions well with clear, direct, just give it to me straight, just be honest, and a woman who's like, who her communication style is just casting that net and like, well, like it just becomes a little bit flowy and watery, and the whole thing is creating a picture, you know, and so those two things can sometimes just not quite link up. So it's almost like understanding how each one understanding like the yin and the yang, and how to offer the thing that doesn't maybe feel as natural for them. Like, for instance, this work that I do with men is really educated me on how to have a more clear, direct, simplified mode of communication. And it works.
How much of that do you think though is socialization, and how much of that is like neurology?
Yeah, well, I definitely think it's both. You know, I just think it's both. I think the socialization part of it to me would be like, men have these typical roles where they're supposed to be like non-emotional, and just it's more masculine, and like encourage for them to just be very minimal, just cut it out and just give them direct. And yeah, as women, we are more encouraged to have a wider emotional range that we express through. So I think it's both.
Yeah, because I know we often talk a lot about how in this culture, the way men are socialized is they're allowed to have two emotions essentially, which is anger and lust. And that's the range of their emotional expression, and like grief and mourning and sadness, and the whole range of human emotion is at least until recently, I would say, like the whole baby boomer generation and before that, and certainly Generation X. That was very much what it meant to be a man, like stoic and unemotional and unmoving. So there's all this like repressed emotion, you know, living with, that's allowed to come out in fucking or fighting. That's essentially it. You can fuck or you can fight. That's your emotional range as a man, right? And how debilitating that is, and how it robs them of their connection to their own inherent, you know, sensual nature. So what are some other ways in which you see that there's a divide between the way men operate in relationship and the way women operate in relationship that may be causing friction?
Well, I think again, because men have a much more kind of simplified range of expression, and women have a much more, I think, just a wider range of expression. Part of how that plays out in intimacy is that there are these different layers of intimacy. And I think women in general are really tuned into this. And I think men in general are not. So like these different layers. So I liken it to a flower, where you have the center of the flower, and then you've got all the petals surrounding it. And if the center is sexual intimacy, you've got, moving out from there, physical and emotional and sensual and energetic. And for a woman, it really helps us to open in our hearts when all those other layers are acknowledged, let alone enjoyed and stimulated, right? And men, you know, they're working more with just kind of like sexual, physical, emotional, if they're a little bit more tuned in. But a lot of men are not as tuned in to the more sensual and energetic layers. And so that's part of my work actually, is teaching men about the value, well, first of all, that these exist, just teaching them that like, yeah, these are other aspects that women, we really need, especially for long-term
Mm-hmm.
connection, in order for our bodies to continue opening up in a really juicy, pleasurable way, we need our hearts to be tended to. We need these other aspects of intimacy to also be really tended to. So energetic and sensual levels of intimacy are part of the work that I do with men and with women too. A lot of women, even though they have this greater capacity just inherent within them already, there's still a lot of education for women that's what it is, you know, just giving them more understanding even of their own experience. So I think sexually it plays out where, you know, when man and woman come together, man thinks he's covering all the bases because, you know, he held her for a little bit and then started kissing her, and then one thing went to another, and now they're having sex, and great, you know. And well, that's fine, and you know, there's a time and a place for all kinds of love making and fucking and all kind, you know. But for a woman, for the long term, we need these more sensual, energetic aspects to be played with.
Yeah, and enhanced and enriched, like something that arises very often in my work, particularly with couples that have been together for a very long time. It's like, you know, there won't be any intimacy or any connection during the day, and you're just kind of going about your everyday life, and then, you know, at night the guy's like, okay, let's have sex, and the woman's like, are you crazy? Like, there's no connection here. We're not doing this until there's sex, right? Yeah. So that awareness that making love doesn't just happen, penis and vagina in the bedroom, right? That it's this something that's cultivated, this intimacy that's cultivated in every aspect of your life. And it's not like, you know, you shut it down here and then open it up here. So that's a huge discrepancy that I see with many couples, and sometimes in my own life at times that's been present as well, is like that really that desire to have emotional nurturing before there's physical intimacy. And I do agree that is typically, stereotypically, that is a divide. I think also I'm going to chalk that up to cultural conditioning, really, because you mentioned, you know, men having more difficult time accessing their sensual and their energetic. Well, that is part of the way they're socialized in this culture, is to divorce themselves from their sensuality, because that would mean feeling, and then energetically they're so armored that they're not able to have that openness and that sensitivity. So
right.
So yeah.
Yeah, and the armoring is a big piece of it. You know, as women, I think that we have a very powerful role and responsibility even to help to understand more about what men are struggling with, and how to create the space that feels safe for them to want to disrobe all that armor. You know, I mean, it's, you know, there's a lot of guys, they've never really cracked into all that that got shut off from when they were a child. So to go back into that space, you know, it's pretty vulnerable, especially if, you know, that first layer of blockage going into it is like, whoa, if I go there, that means that I'm weak, or I'm not really a man, and I'm, you know, and I don't want my partner, I don't want to show that to my woman, you know. And so yeah, I really encourage men to find helpful guides for this work, because, you know, on the same token, I don't know that it's necessarily, I think women, we have our role, but I don't necessarily think it's the job of all women to be the healer and the teacher for their partner, but to at least hold that productive space with them, and work some of that out together. But I really do encourage people to find trusted guides to do that work with.
Yeah, I was going to say that, because I agree. It's not, I think it's in relationship. My desire is to be in relationship with people who want to hold healing space for me, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be my healers. And I think it's a huge ask for women in relationship to put aside their own trauma and their own pain and their own wounding to just be these, you know, vessels of love and light for their partners, right? So for men to do their own work, it's like my husband isn't my therapist. He may be my counselor sometimes, he may be my confidant, but he's not my therapist. And so same with this, it's, for men that are really wanting to embark on this healing journey, having someone outside of the relationship that can actually be their guide, and knowing that their partner is like on the sidelines cheering them along.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, men and women alike, we all have our work cut out for us on this path, don't we? I mean, women, we've got our stuff too. And I mean, ideally, everyone's getting the professional guidance that they need, and then they get to kind of, experiment and work it out together in their relationship and see what works and what doesn't, and help that be like a powerful context of growth and reflection. But yeah, there's a reason why people go to see a professional outside of the personal connection.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There isn't that charge there and that constant, you're re-triggering each other. And yeah, and so our deepest core wounds are relationship, right? Not having our needs for connection met as children. So
Right.
that's all going to come up. Yeah. So what is the social disability that men are born into in this world? What is that in a nutshell?
Well, it's kind of a lot of what we're talking about right now, of how our culture doesn't understand what it is to be a human. We don't
Mm-hmm.
really understand this body. We only use like 10% of our brains. Like, we as a culture don't foster a lot of connection to ourselves, learning about ourselves, having a healthy relationship to ourselves, let alone a healthy relationship to another person. Our culture, I would say most people don't grow up with the most healthy example of a man and woman adult dynamic in the home. Most people don't get that positive mentoring in school, in their communities, in the workplace, so it's like, as a young person coming up, the modes of information that are available are media, entertainment, porn, things that are just not rooted in actual reality and don't have an intention in mind to like uplift and evolve humanity,
Yeah,
So,
exactly. Quite the opposite.
yeah.
A lot of it's toxic. Like mainstream media is
Right.
generally demonstrating toxic relationship patterns and particularly toxic sexuality. Like
Right.
so toxic.
Right. So it's like, we have I feel like there's like a social disability that we've all been born into, and that's, again, like, we are in this powerful time right now on the journey of humanity. I mean, we are taking a really good look at all the things that are not working, and we have this amazing opportunity to, let's rewrite the story. Like, how are we going to rewrite this? And I think this is such a big piece of it, is, again, educating mothers and fathers that are going to be producing new little humans. Like, I just can't say, I just feel like there would be so much value if people had this in mind before they decided to start making families, that, hey, I really want to understand this more, and I want to understand this more before I go make another one of me, because I want to teach that little kid the good, healthy skills of what it to grow up to be a healthy, happy human that can contribute positively in the world and have healthy relationships.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, and that in and of itself is such a huge can of worms. You know? Well, we'll just leave it at that. So, in your opinion, what are some things that women, that mothers particularly, can do to support their young sons in developing healthy relationship dynamics? So,
Yeah.
none of us have it all figured out, so we're not going to be perfect at all ever. you know but while, if we do have if we are cultivating awareness, and we are somewhat educated about the fact that, yeah, there's like all these toxic things that my child is exposed to, what can mothers do to not protect, but to ensure the healthy development of their young son's ability to relate to other humans?
Yeah, it's such a powerful question. And I think it's actually one of the most essential pieces of this puzzle, actually, which first and foremost starts with a woman knowing her value,
Yeah.
knowing what she's worth, having personal integrity to herself, setting up boundaries that reflect that value and personal integrity. And Boundaries is so important. And the thing is that in my work, what I see a lot of is people think that setting the boundary is the work. So I think setting the boundaries like 20%. 80% is maintaining the boundary when it's pushed up against, because it will be pushed up against.
Mm-hmm.
As little boys, they will push up against those boundaries. Little people of any gender, they will push up against those boundaries. And what I see over and over as a pattern is that very loving, well-intentioned mothers set a boundary and the kid pushes up against it and she folds.
Mm-hmm.
And what I would hope more mothers to understand is that, look, this piece is far more beyond just what's happening in the personal dynamic between the mother and the child. That child is going to learn behaviors that he then goes out into the world. He's going to play that out in his schools, the authority figures in his schools, in his workplace. He's going to play that out with the women that he starts dating and beyond, And so I think that I just think that there's so much value in these little boys starting to learn these healthy patterns with their first love, which is their mother.
Yes.
And they need to know, what is it like when mom really stands her ground in a firm, loving, yet clear way, when no really means no. And there's no question, there's no conversation, there's no doesn't mean no until you scream so loud, I just can't take it anymore. And then it becomes a yes. We as women, we do need to shift that.
Mm-hmm.
We do need to shift that. Like, we need to teach our children that there's an authority, there's a purpose for that. And part of the educational experience is they get to learn how to be respectful.
Mm-hmm.
They get to learn that part of loving someone means respecting their boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
And how to do so in a way that feels loving, how the boundary can be supported in a loving way, and how it can be met in a loving way, even if it means that he doesn't get what he wants.
Yeah. As you're saying this, I just have there's so much coming to my awareness of like the stress and the overwhelm of single mothers, and like, how, he's screaming and crying. And I do want to shut him up right now because I've just worked a 10-hour shift and I'm exhausted and I've got to get up in 3 hours and go to my second job. So it's like, it's such a place of privilege that we speak of, like this assumption that it's a 2-parent family, and that the women actually are going to have the mothers are actually going to have the emotional wherewithal to have the resilience to be able to maintain these boundaries, when one of the reasons they may not maintain the boundaries is because it's actually an act of self-care. Like, I'm going to die right now or go crazy if I don't shut him up, right? So I think it's like the social dynamics is like such a huge role in an ideal world. Yes, we all are in 2-parent homes, and yes, it's like we have the luxury of being able to say, well, this way and that way, but that's not the reality that we're living in. There's so many women raising sons all on their own that are completely overwhelmed and stressed out, and don't have the inner resources to be able to always set these really clear and firm boundaries and adhere to them all the time. Do you have any advice for women that are just like overwhelmed, and like how like they aren't always going to be able to do that? They aren't always going to have that spaciousness to do that. Any suggestions in that regard?
Well, I think that's a very, very good point. You're right. There's, we're not living in a perfect world where everyone has this luxury of emotional, just this like storehouse of extra, right? And I mean, I have friends single moms, that they're just like, there's just sometimes where the kid starts acting up, and my friend in this one story, she's like, sometimes I'm just in a really good mood and I don't want to be mean mommy. Like, it was just like every 5 minutes when the kid, she's just, and again, like what you spoke to, there's a self-care, there's a self-preservation piece of that, of like, so that is a piece. I also do think that consistency is effective.
Yeah.
It just is. And the thing is that I feel like it's a kind of thing where it requires more work up front, but if it's done and the pattern is set and understood, then it means that for the long haul, for the long game, it's going to be a little easier. And so maybe it's something like, I always, when I work with my clients, I encourage them to, in a sense, like have this resource card that they can just have in their back pocket, and they can just pull that card when this specific situation comes up. They just pull that card, and this is how it is. This is how it is. This is how it's going to go. And, you know, so I would encourage, you know, so something that seems to work well for my clients is to figure out what the resource card is. Like when the kid starts acting up in this way, what's the thing that's going to, it might not necessarily solve the thing right there, but what's going to be the thing that just takes it to the next level of progression? That what's going to be the thing that just kind of neutralizes what's going on, and whether it's actually addressing it in the moment, whether it's a way that the parent can create a little bit more space for herself. You know, I mean, there's got to be something. There's got to be something, because we also can't leave things in a place where the kid is in control and running the show.
Yes, I'm raising a puppy right now. I hear you with that front loading, and it's like, oh my God, like, ah! I think anyone before they have a child should raise a puppy.
Agreed.
It's a freaking circus at our house, right? But it has, he's been with us for like 8 weeks, and we're not, okay, so now he knows, you know, he's calms down, like there's because their brains are evolving and growing, right? That the things or the patterns that are established very early on will carry through and definitely create more ease. And I love what you said about having a resource card, because in the minute when we're triggered and we're in that amygdala, it's like, we're in fight or flight, it's really hard to remember our touchstones. So to have something written down, right, and that you can just pull out and bam, and then also it's written, which makes it real.
Right.
Society, if you write it down, it exists, right?
And so, yeah, and that's the point, is like the resource card. The point is because when we are triggered, it's really hard in that moment to think about the perfect thing to do to address this, you know? I mean, you know, so it's like, if we just, for me and for in my own personal life and for the work that I've done with my clients, it's just been really helpful for them that they know that that's just what they go to, you know, and they just can play, and, you know, metaphorically speaking, put that card down on the table and be like, okay, this is how this is going to go. Because and you know, when you just spoke to a good point about like the development of the brain, you know, children, our brains aren't fully developed till we're like 25. Like our centers of empathy, and like, so children, their little minds, all they know is me, mine. Like their world literally is about, it surrounds them. I mean, just like it does for all of us, but they don't have the capacity yet to like really step outside and, oh, let me think about mom really quick. It's not to say that it never happens, but it's just not necessarily where their brains are at.
Narcissists.
Yes, exactly.
Self-absorbed. That's and then empathy is actually that's a state signpost of human development, right? The ability to like look outside yourself and be like, oh, there's other people on this planet besides me.
Right. I mean, man, I just give it up to parents. I mean, I feel like parents, they're probably, in a lot of situations, I feel like parents don't get like a really solid, true thank you until the kid is like about mid-20s and they're out on their own and doing all this stuff and then they realize, whoa, first of all, they have the realization, wow, my mom and dad are people outside of just being my mom and dad. And then just all that they've given to them, right, to support their lives. So yeah, but yeah, I mean, I think it's just really, it would just be so valuable to our culture if these pieces were adopted into the family more. Because the thing is, you know, the world outside is not the world outside is not really taking responsibility to raise our children, like, and kind of rightfully so. I mean, as far as the world goes, they look in on the families and they're like, that's your job.
Mm-hmm.
You raise the child to be a good human. Mm-hmm. We're going to put it through school and we're going to educate it. And then there's options for jobs. You make it into a good human, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and the world is pretty psychotic. I wouldn't want it raising my child.
That's a good point.
So what are things that daddies can do to help their sons' brains develop the ability to have, enriching intimate connections and sensual expression? And, I know all of it, it starts here, but for the men that are beginning the journey of self-cultivation and developing awareness, what are some things that you see that the men can do to support that process?
Oh, beautiful question. Well, yeah, I think it does start with the self, and perhaps there's ways that dads can include their children into their self-care, self-awareness space, maybe whether a father gives that to himself through being in nature or doing whatever kind of activity that he does to nourish and connect to himself, including his child into that with him, in this case his son, and having some open discussions with the child, like starting to have discussions around emotions and expression and around relating with kids, and just having a more engaged conversation ongoing with what it is like to be a human in the world. I think parents set really powerful examples for their kids and how they interact with each other, both in ways that are loving and even when they're having challenges. I don't necessarily think parents, I don't think it's very helpful to fight in front of kids. But perhaps there's a degree of communication that can be appropriate. And then I guess maybe if it moves, to a realm of like, okay, it's getting tense, let's just take this in the room or something, but I mean, kids learn by example, right? They're just watching everything around them. And if they see that that's how dad treats mom, well, I guess that's how I should treat mom too. And then I'm going to go to school and I'm going to treat my friend like that. And, so.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. They learn through observing. And I love that, like teaching through doing, right? So spending time demonstrating, for men to demonstrate meeting their own needs for self-care and including their children in that when it's appropriate is a beautiful modeling for children to be like, oh, I can actually prioritize self-connection. Oh, I can actually, express my sensuality, that sort of thing. And and arguing in front of your children is traumatizing. So we know that not everybody has the luxury of not arguing in front of their children, confined spaces and all of that, but it is, it's extremely destabilizing for the child's brain to watch God and goddess clashing.
Right.
Yeah. So let's circle back to what men, grown-ass men, that are like, okay, so I recognize that I'm like, whatever, contracted and caged with armor, and my expression is confined, but I want to heal. I want a different experience. Where do they begin that journey?
Well, two different answers come to mind. I mean, the first answer that comes to mind is that in relation to women, if a man knows that he's going to have a more successful connection to a woman he wants to be with if he does this work, it will tend to be some good motivation, because there is nothing like a woman, the desire for a man, there's nothing like the desire for the love, to receive the love of a woman, to like light that spark under his ass and get him to like do something. Men are really motivated by women, and it's a beautiful thing. It's not in a condescending way at all. It's just they are really motivated. Like if they want to be with a really high quality woman, and that woman, she's on her path and she's doing her work, and they're gonna have to engage with that also to meet her and be on the same playing field. But again, for men in general, just them to themselves, seeking professional help, like really seeking guidance, counseling, therapy, healing work, like really creating the space to tap in and unpack all the stuff in there so that they can be more engaging on those energetic, sensual levels. I mean, there's so many men, when they come to see me and I always ask them, this question, what brings you to this work? What is it you're feeling like you're wanting or you're needing? And sometimes they have this very detailed, thoughtful response. Most of the time it's just kind of like, I don't know. It just sounded good. And it's like, okay. And, so it's like, I get it. They're just answering a calling, and they really don't know. Because there's kind of a thick layer between themselves and their heart to really knowing what it is that's compelling them forward in this way. And it's not like a right or wrong, good or bad kind of thing, and all that is needed is that force of being compelled and just taking that step and just going into that and being really brave. It takes a lot of courage to tap in. I mean, doing deep inner work, it's a pathway to find the truth and beauty that we really are inside, and the journey to get there, not so beautiful.
Yeah.
You
have to go through you got to go through the charnel grounds. You've got to confront all your wounding, everything that blocked you from that bliss. We've got to actually oh, wow, that was in the way of that bliss. That's kind of shitty.
Right. And there's a lot of, we're inherited a lot of stuff through childhood, but we also, at some point, we have to really take responsibility for who we are and how we are. We have to take responsibility for our lives being the way it is. We have to take ownership of the fact that we are powerful creators, just by, again, going back to just education around how does this work, this human thing, creativity and our power to create. I mean, people so easily miss it because it's just so inherently a part of who we are. And at the same time, it's so important that we connect to that so that we can take responsibility and step into our role as a powerful creator of ourselves, of our relationships, of our life. Yeah.
So as you're speaking, what comes to mind, and something I've noted often, is the lack of rites of passage, particularly for men in this culture. So, none of us get rites of passage like they used to be in the Western world, but at least we women, we menstruate, right? So we get the box of tampons or pads, and we get a little talk about, okay, this is the way your body works and whatever. Now, whatever, bye-bye. But for men, there's no clear line of demarcation from childhood into manhood. For yoni owners, for cisgender women, the line of demarcation is menstruation. But for cisgender men, there's nothing happens other than maybe they have a wet dream and that's it, right? So what are your thoughts on that? How big of a role do you think that plays in the lack of maturation for cisgender men?
I think it's huge. I think that's a really good point. I mean, and to speak to your example, women, we gather and we talk. Mm-hmm. I mean, not only with our friends, but you stick a group of women that have never seen each other in a room before, and in 2 minutes we are going into all the stuff. We're just here I am, and we're because it feels good for us to share, and we very naturally hold that space together. And so it's still, we don't have the rites of passage, which would be really good if there was something, but it is at least more than what men have, because men are, I think culturally, our culture is just more isolating for men. Men don't get together and have conversations about their wet dreams, so what was that like? What was going on? It's like
details.
Yeah, it's not quite like that for them, right? And so, yeah, I mean, God, it would be so powerful for men to have some kind of rites of passage, again, either something that's offered by the parents, or maybe there's some kind of program that someone offers in the local community, but something, because I mean, this also in my mind connects to the topic of sexual education, which like most people don't get any sex education in the home. The sex education that we get in school, I mean, is so minimal. We've got, it basically covers abstinence, protection, STDs. And that's like sex education. It's like, there's so much more to sexuality than just that one piece, obviously. And there's no, and so again, as curious young adults, they want to know, I mean, this is a really juicy topic of life, and they want to know, so where do they go? They Google YouTube and porn, so it's like, there really does need to be some kind of rites of passage and education. And I love, like, when I hear about the wilderness programs for youth, I mean, I want to go do one. I think that sounds amazing. But I think that is a really, that would be, I think, a really powerful initiation for young people coming up in the world, get them out into nature, like with a trusted, experienced guide who not only does like wilderness survival, but can mentor youth. I think that would be a really powerful outlet to look into.
Yeah, and I really, my sense of it is it's the sexual piece that is really what was the word I'm looking for? It's like an energy drag when I sense into it. It's like a shackle almost that keeps cisgender men shackled to their boyhood or their childhood, because they aren't given education in what enriching sexual connection can look like. As you said, it's like their resource is porn, and there's all different kinds of porn. Usually the kind of porn that they find is not necessarily life enriching. It's not consciously like, we're going to make porn that's going to demonstrate real authentic connection and communication and real examples of female pleasure. That's not usually the porn you're finding online. You're finding, degrading interactions. And I mean degrading because there's no actual connection at all. There's no mutual respect. There's no authentic pleasure, right? And so they watch this and their brains are programmed to it, and then they're masturbating to it, right? And so their entire sexual neurology is wired for this usually aggressive, disconnected, porn style, thrusting, pumping, fucking, and not intimacy, not connection, and not enrichment and exaltation of female pleasure. It's the the show, it's the whatever, the presentation of it, but not the actual reality of it, not the energetic transmission. And not that I've studied this in depth, but like just kind of cursorily viewing rites of passages in different cultures around the world, usually it's happening at this really critical point of, going from adolescence to boyhood. And usually there's a sexual component, whether it's like, some kind of ritualistic circumcision, or whether it's, which I don't agree with, but sometimes like a little snip just to symbolize, right? Or, spending time with an elder woman to train them in the arts of love. That happened a long, long time ago. But there's usually something that marks the progression into manhood that may include, nature trips, but it also incorporates some aspect of sexual maturity as well. And that is what I think is so profoundly lacking in this culture, because of this culture's like insanely traumatized, repressive relationship with sexuality. And that's what I see often in my work, is that is the component for so many men, and how they can actually show up fully to be of service to the women in their lives in the way that they want to. They're held back by their premature ejaculation. They're held back by their sexual wounding. They're held back by their lack of education about how to work with a woman's body, right? So they don't know, and so they never mature fully sexually. So there's this aspect of them that's always 14.
Right, right. And part of the learning that they get from porn is, and that is related to the topic of a woman's pleasure and how that works, it doesn't fully translate through porn because, you know, porn is happening, it's happening on a spot, you know, cameras rolling, okay, do the thing, you know, it's like a woman's pleasure doesn't work like that. And men, and in my work that I've done with couples, I've seen how men, because of the ways they are informed on this topic in their lives, the ways that they tend to touch women are a little bit like, it's got this energy of like, okay, I massaged you for 5 minutes, like, and now, like, can we hurry up and, like, so I did my part, like, you do your part, and like, hurry up and come, please, you know? And it's like, and there's just this lack of understanding of like, okay, it actually connects me back around to the piece I spoke to at the beginning about how like the men operate with just like this straight, clear arrow, and the women have this kind of wide net that we cast. It's kind of like that with our pleasure too. Our pleasure, it has such a range, and women get so much satisfaction out of all kinds of touch and stimulation and connection, and women can get so much pleasure and gratification out of a sexual experience that never goes to orgasm. And men, and it could take women, you know, I mean, we could take a long time to get to an orgasm, but so the orgasm itself, I mean, of course we all love it, but it's not the point. It's not the point.
Not the goal, right?
The journey is the point. And men, I think, are still learning that, just, they're learning about the value of creating the journey experience for her. Like, sure, if it goes into the realm of orgasm, great, but there's so much pleasure and nourishment she gets just through a quality of connection and quality of touch, and knowing that he's there and he's got her and he's not rushing her. And if she doesn't get to orgasm, it doesn't mean that there's something wrong with her. It doesn't mean that he failed in any way. You know, this is all part of the education that's really needed, so that men know that, like, when they go into that space with their woman, it's not just about, like, you know, how they do in porn. You don't give just like a few minutes to, you know, touch everywhere else and then just get straight to it. You know, there really is more of a process to engage with.
Well, I mean, porn is designed for the cum shot. That's what it's
right.
designed for, right? Which is why it's so detrimental. But yes, and what you're describing, like what I've observed in my work, is that there's literally a rewiring that needs to happen in the nervous system of all of us, but when we're talking about sexuality and porn, particularly in men. And the more time, the more they're able to be present and relax with their female partners, that energetic transmission helps rewire their own nervous system so that they can relax with pleasure and separate orgasm from ejaculation. And then one orgasm isn't the goal. Let's have 10 tonight. Right on. Well, thank you so much for this very delicious conversation. How can people find out more about you and your work?
So goddessmodern.com is my website. I'm on social media, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, about Goddess Modern, at Goddess Modern. Instagram is at goddess.modern, but you'll find me there, Goddess Modern and Kelley Mountain. Thank you so much for this very nourishing, enriching conversation and for welcoming me here with your audience today.
Yeah, you're so welcome. And where are you located again? Just so in case
I'm in the Bay Area, California.
Okay, right on, right on.
Yeah.
So good. So I'm sure we've got many, many listeners in that area if they want to reach out and connect with you in person, if we're able to do that in the age of COVID.
Absolutely.
Right on. Yay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us for this conversation this evening. And if you are inspired and stimulated to begin your journey of healing and want to work with Kelley Mountain, you can find her at goddessmodern.com. And I'm going to invite you all to stay connected with me between shows because we have so much fun on social media. You can find us at Authentic Tantra on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, of course, all the networks. And you can also catch us on YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Sex is Medicine. You'll get this video and other ones. We have many other videos. And also I invite you to go to our website, authentictantra.com. We just upgraded the website. I want to know what you think. So send us a message through contact and make sure that you sign up for our Tantra is Medicine ebook or our 3 Tantric Secrets for Extraordinary Sex at authentictantra.com. Thank you once again. Have a beautiful evening, and I will see you next week.